Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we are talking about one of the most important concepts in Entity Framework core, and that is called as navigation property. If I ever wondered how EF core automatically performs joins without writing a SQL, then this video is for you. In Entity Framework core, navigation properties allow a C# classes to follow a relationship between different table like join in SQL. Instead of writing a SQL manually, EF core let you access related data through simple C# objects. Now, what does that mean? Let's say I have a two table name as employee and department, and I want to connect both the tables. In SQL, it is simple. You simply create a foreign key and a primary key, and then you join both of them. In EF core, we have to do the same thing, but that will be done with the help of navigation properties. Navigation property also help me out to load related data between both the tables. So coming back to the same example, if my employee table and department table is there, and if they are connected by navigation property, I can load the data which is related to with each other. I'll show you how this will be done in next couple of minutes. It also helped me to write it down the clean link queue instead of join statement. With the help of navigation property, I can technically join two different tables and no need to write a complex link queue statement in order to make it work, and they make my code much more object oriented as well. Navigation property are divided into three different categories, that is one to one to many, and many to many. Now let's understand what do you mean by one to many, and many to many. One to one simply says that there will be a one record in a child table depending upon the parent table. In this example, let's say I'm having a user table, and this user table have three columns: ID, name, and email, where ID is my primary key. A user profile table is there, which is linked to my user table, and the user ID column of my user profile table is basically linked with the ID column of my user table. I also have to make sure that for a single user ID, there should not be two records in my profile table. This is called as one-to-one mapping. And let me tell you how we can do this with the help of an entity framework core navigation properties. So I'll first navigate back to my rider, and over there I'll start creating two different classes, one for user and another for user profile. Now to save some time, I already have done this part, and these two classes consist of some common functionality or some common properties like ID, name, and email in my user table, and again ID, city, state, and country into my user profile table. Now, as per the diagram, you can see there should be another column in my user profile, and that is called as user ID. So let's jump back to Rider again and create a new column into my user profile table, and let's give this name as public int user ID. Now, this user ID will automatically act as a foreign key in my application itself. But we need to write couple of lines of code again in order to make it work. In my user profile table, since a user profile is linked with my user table itself, I have to basically call an instance of my user table over here. I can write it down public user and call its reference, and this will act as a navigation property. Or simple term, this is my navigation property, which will help me out to retrieve data from my user table whenever I want to fetch a data from user profile table. In this way, the user ID will act as a foreign key, and this user instance will act as a navigation property in my user table. The same configuration I have to do into my user profile as well, and in my user as well, and when I go to my user table, I need to again refer my user profile. So public user profile and then user profile and getter and setter, and that's it. And this will also act as a navigation property in my EF core. So now you can see that with the help of my entity framework core, in the classes, I have created a linking between both the classes. My user profile is linked with my user, so that's why in my user profile, I have made a reference of my user class. And my user class, I have made a reference of my user profile class. With this, I also have to define a configuration. So we discussed in the last session or in the last video how to define a Fluent API configuration in Entity Framework Core. I'm going to do that again in this project as well. We'll create a new folder, give this folder name as configuration. And inside the configuration folder, I create a class file and will give this name as user configuration. This user configuration class file should be inherit from I entity type configuration. And in entity type configuration, let me first complete this. And then inside this, I need to basically give a reference of my user table. We also discussed that we need to create a constructor for it. And in the configure method, I need to write a code in order to make it work. So I'll say that builder dot has one, which means a user is having one user profile with one, which means now I'm doing one to one mapping, and a single user profile is linked to a single user. And then I'll again write down has foreign key, which means the user profile will having a foreign key, and the foreign key name will be key dot user ID, where I'll write x tends to x dot user ID. I think I have made a mistake, so this should be x tends to, or maybe let's say I can use a tends to a dot user ID. And then finally, I'll write down on delete, it should be has foreign key. My bad. Has foreign key. And then I'll write down, this should be fixed again. And then I'll write down on delete, and then delete behavior dot cascade. So in this way, I have configured a one-to-one mapping between my user and my user profile table. I have to again go back to my DB context class. And inside DB context class, I need to override a method which says on model creating. And I need to write it down another line which says model builder dot apply configuration from assembly and give the assembly name, which is my sample DB context assembly type. Now we have to run the migration. Once my classes are created, the next step for me is to create a tables in my database. And we know that in order to create a table in Entity Framework core, we need to run a migration. I'll switch back to my terminal. I'll write a command .NET ef migrations add init database. Running this migration will create a migration folder in my source control. So if I navigate back to my writer, you can see a migration folder got created. And this include a table script to generate that table. In the script section, you can say that I have a user and then user profile, and then I'm having a primary key and foreign key. You can see with the help of navigation property, a foreign key is getting created in my table itself. Let's update this against my database. So I'll write down .NET ef database update. And once I press enter, you will see that the entire migration got put into my database. I'm using data grip, again a tool from ZBrain for this database itself. And if I run a query against it, you can see now my database consists of another part that is this data system sample database, which is my database name. And let's go inside this database. So I'll navigate inside the database itself. And once I navigate inside it, you will notice that this database is having a couple of tables. The tables of this database can be accessed by the command sys.tables. And if I run this command now, you will notice that I'm having two tables. One is my user and second is my user profile. Now, this is my one-to-one mapping. Okay. And this is how it can be created. So in simple terms, if you want to create a one-to-one mapping into your entity framework core, you need to first of all create two classes, one for user, one for user profile. You can again name them as per your own business use case. In the second class or in the profile section, I need to add a foreign key, and then we need to add a navigation property. This navigation property will give a signal to Entity Framework core that this is my navigation property and we need to create a link or a join in order to create a tables like this. Now, this is all about one-to-one, but how we can do the second part of it, that is one-to-one mapping. And let's discuss a one-to-one mapping as well in my Entity Framework core. So in one to many mapping, basically I am having a single table and a single department table. So we'll again take a reference of my user table, but this time we'll create a new table that is name is department. And you know that a department table can be have a multiple employees of a same type. So a user can belong to a single department, but a department can have a multiple users. So that is basically my one to many mapping. So I'll again navigate back to my rider and we'll create a relevant classes for it. The first class that I'll create is my department class. And in my department class, I'll simply give two properties. So public int ID and then public string name. Or just to make it more clear, let's add the column name as department name. Now, again, what we have to do, we have to create navigations in both the table because that is how a EF core will let us know, or we will let EF core know that we want a linking within two different tables. Now, as I mentioned in one-to-one mapping, a single user can belong to only one department. As per the business use case, you cannot have a user that belongs to multiple departments. So that's what we'll do over here. We'll create a new column and let's call the column name as department ID. And in the department ID column, this will now act as a foreign key in my user table. And I'll also add a navigation property for my department. And now this will act as a navigation property. So because a single user can have only one department, that's why I'm only adding a single department instance over here. But a department can have multiple users. You know that in a single department there are multiple users. So in this case, the department will have a navigation property and that will be a collection of users. So you can simply assume this that a single department will have multiple users. So that's why we are using a collection of user. But a single user only belongs to a single department. That's why we have a single department over here. Now, this is fine in context of an EF4 navigation property. And again, we have to create a migration for it. So what we can do, first go to my configuration table on the folder and create a new configuration. Give this name as department configuration. And once I clear this class file, I have to again inherit my class file with I entity type configuration. And then we have to give a department reference over here. So let's give the name as department. And then it will force me to create a constructor. And inside the constructor, now I will write a separate Fluent API, which will look like builder dot has many extends to x dot users, then with one extends to department, and then has foreign key as my department ID, and then we'll write another statement which is on delete. We should not terminate this statement over here, and then write down on delete, and then the delete behavior should be cascade. I want to let you know one more thing that it is not mandatory to create these configuration, the one that we did for my user profile and for my department, to create navigation property and joins between table. Ready framework is smart enough to decode the logic depending upon the generated classes and will again create a it will automatically create a foreign key and primary key by its own. Let me show you how this can be done. So if I comment out the entire code that I have written in my department table, a department class configuration, and if I again navigate back to my terminal, and if I again create a new migration, let's say, and the migration name is, let me first clear this out. The migration name is .NET EF migrations add added department table and press enter, you will notice that a new migration got created and the created migration, which is this one, already has a foreign key as well, right? So it already has a foreign key and everything. So it's not mandatory, it's not necessary even that you create these configurations in Unity Framework code. But the advantage of creating this configuration is you will have a full control of your columns and everything. Like right now, what you can see in my department table or in my user table, I have column name as department ID. So native framework is automatically decoding a logic that this department ID will definitely belongs to my department table because of naming convention. If you follow the proper naming convention, then there is no need to apply configuration. But if you don't follow this naming convention, maybe you want to give this as DID or maybe something else, then you need to come to this configuration file and have define configuration like this. In my opinion, it's better to define configuration every time because that will give you as well as other colleagues a complete idea what you are doing behind the scenes. So let me uncomment these changes and let me first remove the last migration with the command .NET EF remove migration so that the file that is created will be deleted. .NET EF remove migrations. Sorry, my bad. The command is .NET EF migrations remove. And when I press enter, in that case, my last migration file got deleted because that was not applied to a database. And now I'll again add a new migration with the same name so that I just want to show you that whether you create a configuration or you don't create a configuration, there will be no impact at all. I'll again run it. And then if I proceed further, you will notice that a new file got created and that file will again have a same configuration. Now you can see that a file is created, but before updating my database, I want to cover a specific context over here, and that is a use of makefile. A makefile is a simple text file that helps to automate command using a tool called make. So you must have noticed that while working with .NET or any other project, you must have to write multiple commands. These commands are something which is a part of your development lifecycle. Now, if you want to prefer a GUI based approach, it's totally okay for you to skip this section. But if you are someone who like to do things more from the command prompt side, then I think a makefile is something which can help you out in your daily development workflow. So you can see that I can build my entire code with .NET build. And when I write .NET build, my entire code got built. Similarly, if I write .NET run, my entire source code will start running. But you will notice that every time I need to write down .NET build, .NET run to make it work. Similarly, with my EF core, you must have noticed that we are writing a command called as dot, that .NET EF database update, .NET EF add migrations, and so on. And again, writing this command multiple times is error prone. You must have noticed that even we write command tens of times, you make some mistake, and then you will get an error from your command prompt, and then you have to write it again. We can fix this issue with the help of a utility called as make. And the make utility is by default installed in macOS and Linux. But if you are on Windows, then you can install this with the help of a tool called Chocolatey. First install Chocolatey tool and then install choco install make. Don't worry, I'll give the reference of this URL as well as the command in the description section. But once you have this tool ready, then you navigate back to your rider, and in the file system, that is in the root folder, you will create a file and give this file name as makefile. We'll create a file and give the file name as makefile. Now, I have to write couple of commands over here. So let's say the first command is I want to build my entire code. So I'll simply write it down build .NET build. And this build is basically something which I need to remember. And this build will execute .NET build internally when I run this build command. Now, what does that mean? Let me navigate back to my terminal again. And you can see there is a make file in my root project. I will write down make build. And you can see once I write a make build, a .NET build get executed, which means no need to remember .NET build again and again. No need to write .NET build again and again. Simply write down, simply give a user-friendly name to your make command and you are sorted. Similarly, if I want to run, I will write down another command and let's give this name as run. And I'll write down .NET run and I'll again save it and navigate back to my terminal. And this time I will write make run and this will run my entire project. You'll see how simple it is to not to remember these configuration, these command and simply create a shortcut and can run it. So I'm going to use this shortcut for my entity framework core migration command. I'll navigate back to my terminal and then I'll add another command and this time I'll write down date. And in the update section, I'll write down .NET EF database update. Now you know that one of my migration is pending. That is my department table. And I have not run it yet against my database. I'll go to my terminal and instead of writing a command .NET EF database update, I will write down make update. You will notice that make update will actually execute .NET EF database against internally, and then my entire changes are then updated to my database. So you know how cool and handy feature it is as the make file, as the make command. No need to remember these commands again and again, and it will make it work. Similarly, if you want to add some migration, I'll add another command. So I'll copy this again and I'll paste it. And this time I want to add migration. So I'll write down add over here. Now add a little bit different because whenever you add a migration, you need to give a migration name as well. The migration name will act as a parameter. So I'll write down .NET EF followed by migrations and then add, and then I use dollar and then a parameter name as name. So this name parameter should be provided while running a command because obviously each and every migration is having a different name itself. But let's jump back to the topic again. And we were discussing about the concept of one to many. Now you can see that if I go to my database, in my tables, I have a department table as well. And this department table will having a one to many reference with my user table. And you can keep inserting a record into a department table, and the user table will have a reference as a department ID. And that department ID will act as a foreign key from a department table itself. So we have covered the concept of one to one and one to many, and they are quite heavily used in my DB context. So I can have one to one, I can have one to many, and with the help of these migrations, with the help of navigation property, I can make it work. Now the third part is many to many, and it might be possible that there might be a cases where you want to have a linking like many to many. So for example, a table name as student and a table name is courses. Now you know that each student can have a each course, and all the courses will have all the students. In that case, I have to use a many to many linking in my entity framework code navigation properties. So I'll again navigate back to my rider and I'll quickly create two more classes for it. The first class is, I can say, student. The second class is, let's say, courses. And in that case, I will simply make it simple. And in the student section, I will write down public int ID, or maybe let's say just make it ID only, not student ID. And then getter and setter. And I'll also include public string name, getter and setter. So this will give me student ID and student name. Maybe if you want, you can have first name and last name. But just to keep it simple, I'm leaving it as it is. Similarly, I'll go to my courses table and I'll add the same thing over here. And I'll simply write down public int ID and public string course name. Now, as we are doing many to many mapping, we have to basically use navigation property in both the classes and that to a list of it. So a single course can have multiple students. So I'll write it down public I collection, give the name as students, and then create a navigation property with it. Similarly, I'll go to my student table and I'll again write it down public I collection, and then this time it should be courses, and again a courses, and again this is a navigation property. So remember, this time I am basically adding a list of references in both the table. In my previous cases, I have only added a single reference. For example, if I take a reference of an user and department, so a department single reference was added in the user table, but in department a list of department was added, a list of user was added. Similarly, in this case, since my student and my courses are automatically many to many, I need to add a reference in both the cases. In many to many, you need to understand one thing, that if you even take care about SQL part, the many to many approach will simply create a third table, and that is called as student courses table, which include a column of both ID and student ID. But the major part in EF core is that you need not to create this table by yourself. That will be taken care by entity framework also. So I can create a configuration again if I navigate back to my rider, and I can create a new configuration file for this stuff as well. But I want to show you that that is not even required, that is not mandatory as well, as I showed you in the last time also. So I'll navigate back to my terminal, and this time I will be adding a new migration for it. And I will be using my make command, the one that we had created last time. So let me reduce the size of it. And now I need to write a command make add migration, which is my this command name, which is my add migration, and then I give the name as added student courses and press enter. And you can see the command that is running against my database is against my terminal is .NET EF migration, which is coming from this part, and then add is hard coded, and this name parameter is passes from the parameter I have added. And you will notice that a new file got created with the name as migration. Now, why this is empty? This is empty because I forgot to add a reference of these file into my DB context class. So let me remove this migration again by the command .NET EF migrations remove. We can also put this in a part of my make file, but let's do it right now. So .NET EF migration remove, and then it will remove that file from my source control. You can see it got removed. And now again go to the terminal. First of all, include both the files into my DB context. So public db set users, sorry, students, and then public db set courses, and then give the name as courses. And again come back to the terminal and write down the same command, make add migration name added courses. Okay, and then I'll press enter. So it will again run my migration command, and it will create a new file in my database, and this will have all the tables. And now you will notice that a migration is creating first a student table, then a course table, then a student table, and finally it is also creating a joining table which is termed as courses student. Now, since I have not defined any configuration, a configuration over here as a Fluent API, that's why EF core has already taken the name as courses student automatically. But if you create a configuration, if you want to have a control of this table name itself, you have to go to create a separate file and give this name as configuration, and then you need a separate command for it. Okay, I will leave it as it is of now, but definitely we'll cover this in some other session, in some other video. So my file got created. Now let's update my database, and I'll again come to my terminal, and this time I'll write down make update to update my database, and you will notice that the entire code is executed in my database side. And if I navigate back to again my data grip, and if I check the tables, a three table got created. One is for students, second for courses, and then for courses student. So in this way, we can see that we can apply one-to-one, many-to-many, and one-to-many linking between different tables using navigation property. This video is getting longer, so that's why I cannot show you the way to retrieve record from the database. But in the next video, we will be using the same navigation property to retrieve data from a database in an EF code. So this is it from my side for this video. Thanks for watching. If you want a script for EF core, if you want a source code for this, then drop a comment below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with your developer friends. See you in the next one. Thank you.